Shawn Vanderhoven is a partner at the Wiseman Group, where he works with senior leaders and organizations, including Apple, Microsoft, Deloitte, and LinkedIn. Earlier in his career, Shawn helped grow his family's software company 30-fold before moving into leadership development and becoming a collaborator on the second edition of Liz Wiseman's best-selling book, Multipliers. His new book, Pause: How to Lead Brilliant Work in a Busy World, was written with his wife, Anne, who allegedly is smarter than he is. Drawing on his research involving hundreds of leaders and employees, it explores why personal productivity habits often collapse under team pressure and what leaders can do to create the clarity and space their people need to focus on important work. Shawn, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. And you are right. She is much smarter than I am.
All right, let's jump in. Why do driven leaders keep creating the very distractions their teams are trying to escape?
Well, for sure, we don't want to. When I was you know how they say the book finds you? Well, look, there's no way in the world I have any business writing this book, because as we were doing the research, I'll say that over and over and over again, my team would have a laugh because they were like, "Oh, Shawn." The research question we were asking was, what do the best leaders do to create a space for focus? In hyper-connected, otherwise very busy and unproductive environments, where the expectation is still high that you do great work. What's the difference between those leaders versus leaders who just amplify distraction and make it even harder to do deep, focused work? And, the real truth is, as we were going through that, all these negative behaviors that we were finding that amplify distraction, woohoo, totally me. I'm very driven. I like to go fast. I want to go big. And I love an opportunity. I'm a fool for a good opportunity. And I'm a fool for value proposition. And so when you're a driven leader and you're trying to move fast and you're trying to do big things, it's pretty difficult to say no to opportunities. And it's also really easy to underestimate the true time and effort that things will take. And so you're guilty of doing things like, going to your colleague, you get this new opportunity, ironically, probably just after a long prioritization session, and you get 3 things on the board, and then something's on your desk when you get back, and you walk back to your colleague and say, hey, Brad, I got something I want to talk to you about. It's only going to take 5 minutes. Do you mind? Well, they know what? It's never going to take 5 minutes. It's going to take way more than that. Even though we just went prioritized, I'm already talking about this new opportunity. And so I think for many of us that fall prey to unintentionally distracting our teams or being an amplifier of chaos, it's because we just want to do things in the world. We want to go fast, and we're a fool for a good opportunity.
It seems as though you went on a journey. So you've been, maybe for the context of leaders, how much work have you done on the book Multipliers, which is probably, I would say, a good portion of our audience would be very, very familiar with Liz Wiseman's book Multipliers. And I guess through doing that work over and over and over, and then beginning this research project, it seems as though you went on a journey whereby you really started to uncover, as I suppose you've just illustrated, that really what's happening here is the leader is the one that's creating distraction and problem with focus.
Yeah, let's take them both. We'll do, let's first I'll share about what my experience was working with Liz on Multipliers and what I've learned from her and how that influenced this research. And then part 2, what we learned in this research about, leaders that sometimes make it much easier for people to focus. And I think it connects to this idea that we'll also go into, that productivity is often a social problem, whereas we tend to think about productivity in the personal way. What does personal productivity look like? So, well, I'm glad you asked. So I met Liz when she was just starting to work on the second edition of Multipliers. And so what had happened was she released Multipliers in 2010. And it was purchased by loads of people. It was passed around. She jokes that it was purchased by more than just her mom and her brother. And as Multipliers was passed around and she had a chance to teach it throughout the world, she started to learn about the things that she had missed in the research. And one of these ideas that she hadn't done a lot with was the concept of the accidental diminisher. And the more she taught it, the more she would hear back from people that, she's like, people would come to her and say, I work for somebody I wouldn't say is this headline grabbing narcissist that eats children for breakfast, these diminishers that you're talking about. But they do some pretty diminishing things. I just don't think they're aware. And that led to another cycle of research to really name these accidental diminishing tendencies. Well, I met Liz when she was still in that process and wanted to do a second volume to include some of the ideas that weren't in the first volume, which included the accidental diminisher. And it also included this whole idea of dealing with diminishing bosses. How do you multiply up? And then the third thing that she wanted to do was to do something more in the conclusion about how do you really scale the ideas of multiplier? What does it look like to become a multiplier, but at scale? So we ended up connecting on a project, worked together for a little bit. And then I helped with the research, helped with the second edition of the book. And then didn't plan to, but ended up staying there and have been working with her for 10 years now and have gone all around the world teaching multipliers, literally probably thousands of times now in the last 10 years. So it's been a real treat. And what I learned from Liz that was really exciting and invigorating is that she was good at looking through the eyes of the affected. When she'd come up with a research question, she wouldn't, when she decided that she wanted to figure out what's the difference between leaders that shut people down versus leaders that access people's capability, she knew that she couldn't go and ask leaders what the difference was between, well, how do you go to somebody and say, hey, why do you shut people down? That's a very difficult thing to do. But you can go to people and say, hey, what does that person do that shuts you down? What do they assume about you? And then really listen to them about the behaviors that affected their ability to contribute. And so I learned that that's the way that I wanted to do leadership research on this other project that it ultimately became Pause. And that was to look through the eyes of people that were affected by certain types of leadership, to tease out what the leadership behaviors were, what the assumptions were. And I think that's why Multipliers has been such an illuminating book for people, is because it really looks at the problem through their own experience. And I found that to be, really exciting and inspiring for me as well as I, got into the work. Go ahead. Do you have anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things about multipliers with the accidental diminisher, if it was just the diminisher, it would be different. But it enables the person to think, how am I actually shutting down the smarts of the people in my team? But please go on to the second point.
Well, it's a safe way, isn't it, to step into that? Because nobody wants to be a diminisher, but you can step into, I can see how sometimes maybe I've got few too many ideas. Like, okay, I buy that. That's a much safer way to get into it. And also they're born of our strengths. And so, we're going to have these accidental diminishing moments. And so I think that it was quite wise for her to, grab that idea when she saw it and then redo a second edition of the book. And that turned out to be a real blessing in my life to learn from her. So what happened was I had this idea to want to do years before. I had worked with another thought leader to do a project around personal productivity. And we had created this forum where people would come and spend a quarterly offsite in the woods, if you will, where they get clear on their priorities. But you can imagine predictably what happens. They'd have a wonderful day doing design thinking with us, and then they'd go back to the real world and all of their thinking would fall apart. And I wondered about that. I wondered, man, why is personal productivity so hard when you go back to a team, when you get back into your job? And so I had that question for years. Fast forward, when we were doing the Impact Players research, one of the things that people said when we asked them, what is holding you back from doing your very best work? A very common answer. As a matter of fact, for a whole course of, the surveys and responses we were getting, the number one answer was, I can't get deep. I can't focus. And so that, again, reconnected across time. This thing that I had observed with, offsite times to, trying to take priorities and get them into your life. And then people just saying that they couldn't do their best work as a result of not, being able to focus and get deep, that they were always task switching. I wanted to figure out, what can leaders do? What are great leaders doing about this? And so we formulated the question, what do the very best leaders do to create space for people to focus deeply on priorities in hyper-connected, demanding environments versus what do leaders do that, where they kind of just amplify the chaos and make it even harder. And so we interviewed hundreds upon hundreds of people to look through their eyes, just like I'd learned from Liz, to find out the different behaviors that either unlocked their ability to focus and get deep into their work and do things that they were proud of, versus these behaviors that just made it impossible for people to really focus. And so we took all of that data in, thousands of stories, thousands of surveys, to try to figure out, okay, what's the difference here? What's the story here? And it led to this book.
I think that I found what I found to be really interesting was most productivity advice is aimed at the individual, but you've really, I guess, unlocked a different perspective, which is, well, it's the team, the environment, but also the leader that's really creating this challenge. I'm a big fan of Cal Newport's Deep Work book, and as you were speaking before, I'm also thinking about the work that we've done with leadership teams on deep work, and how some people have set up a separate office a few doors down the road, or mandated leadership teams working from home just to try to find a way, because the environment, the situation can be so challenging.
And I think that that's the natural thing when you really get serious about deep work, isn't it? You start to look at, well, what's preventing us from doing this deep focused work? And immediately you see managers coming up with really good answers to this, getting another office, creating, and we cover some of these things and pause, because that's what we learn, is just like you see is, and what you have done naturally as a coach and in your firm, is you start working with leaders to build an environment that is conducive to, doing deep work and focus. And that's, I think, one of the things that became clear to me is that, man, the productivity problem is a social problem for so many of us. Unless you're a professor with tenure, or you are an artist where you have a studio and nobody, knows to not go into the bat cave, to leave you be. For most of us, we're working in an environment, whether we're working from home or in an office, that people need us to do certain things to help them do the work that they do. So we rely on each other. And in these tribal systems, our brains are wired to make sure that we're doing good with our colleagues. And therefore, so often the ideas that we come up with for personal productivity, man, they fail first thing on Monday. Because as soon as we, start working with our leaders or our peers or our clients to get things done, our very best intentions to carve out space for deep work, to become indistractable, if you will, they fail in the face of the social pressure that we experience, and rightfully so, because to succeed in a company, you have to succeed with your peers and your colleagues and your boss. And so I think that we're smart to be cautious to not overly cook the personal productivity stuff and become the person that no one wants to work with, because we're going to get our deep work time. And so what was fun about this project was we saw so many brilliant leaders deliberately create an environment where other people could focus deeply and they could scale it. Even in organizations where the adjacent leaders, their peers in those organizations, the people on those teams reported that they had no space to get deep. But then underneath these leaders who were really creating deliberately fortifying focus, if you will, people were recording oftentimes triple the amount of energy and time going into working deeply. And so I think that if you reckon with the reality that to help somebody get into monk mode, they're going to need a design. They're going to need a conscious effort from the leader to make that possible. It's going to need to be discussed among peers. And as we work together as a team and we, tap the brakes, if you will, to determine how we're going to work together, you can create really amazing environments where personal productivity starts to flourish. But without it, man, it seems like it's tough.
This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan to build the business that you want and the life that you want. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. And you can also check out our books, Made to Thrive, which is about the 5 roles of a CEO. becoming a great CEO rather than just a good CEO in your business. Second is onboarded, which is about hiring and onboarding great people, making sure that you give yourself the greatest chance for people to succeed in your organization. And then third is bigger isn't better, better is better, which is about building a business that is better rather than bigger. It's not about building a little business. It's about building a business that compounds, a business that you can actually fall in love with again. And what does the leader do specifically to stop people being able to find that focus? Because there's the social, the team cohesion. Someone comes up and starts talking to you just as you're starting to go deep. But what does the leader do specifically? What did the research tell you?
Yeah. Well, I'll just give a few examples. We found 3 disciplines, if you will, or where we could clump these behaviors together. So we looked at all these observable behaviors, and the criteria for those people that are interested in research was if you could close your eyes and see the behavior from an interview or from a survey in your mind on stage, that was a behavior that we considered to report on. So we got all of the observable behaviors that were reported to create space for focus and steal it, and we scored them, the ones that showed up the most and had the greatest impact. So there was a multiplier connected to that. And we took the top 12 on each, put them up on a board, and took us, actually a couple of years to do this. And asked the question, okay, well, what do we see here? What's in common? And it was clear as day. The 12 behaviors that leaders did to create space for deep work were a form of slowing things down, not taking breaks like, hey, go on vacation, and do poolside for a little bit. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, but that's not what they were. They were more like tapping the brakes like this, like we've just prioritized for the quarter. And now I'd like for everybody to put everything on the board that they're working on that's not these 3 priorities, so we can get real about what we're really doing right now. We called that turn out your pockets. So that's just a little extra tapping of the brakes. You want people to go fast when they leave that room, go hit those priorities. But that's an example of a pause. You have to everybody turn out their pockets. Let's get all of the hidden workload that people are really doing on the board as well, so we can figure out what we're going to do with it. So there's one example. Here's another example of an easy way to slow down, if you will. I get something from my boss, and let's say you work for me, and I come to you and say, "Hey, Brad, I've got this thing that Shannon just gave to me. Hey, could you just take a look at this for 5 minutes? It won't take you much longer, but it really needs to be done before the end of the day." That's a jump in. I just came in, told you what I had, I gave it to you, and I'm out the door. Now, you could have had, all the intentions to spend your morning working on something that was on that priority board. But now you're stopping and you're starting and you're going in a different direction, and you're a good soldier. So you said, sure, I'll help out. But it's really actually put a wrench in your day. Now, think about this idea on the tune in. If I come to you and say, hey, Brad, I've got this thing from Shannon, and I'm just wondering, can you and I'd just like to walk around this for a bit. Before I even talk to you about it, could you just remind me, what is it that you're working on today? And then you tell me. And then I say, oh, okay. I still think this is worth talking about, because now I get a chance to even determine, should I even interrupt that? Because that may be way more important than what I have. I say, okay, here's this new piece of work. Here's the context. Now, if you were to do this thing well, what would you have to say no to? Now, all of a sudden, we're getting real. We're talking trade-offs. So that's a tune-in. My goal is, instead of doing a drive-by delegation, I'm trying to tune in. There's another example of a pause. So we collected these pauses, and most of them are these micro behaviors where it's just a moment where they tap the brakes a little bit to slow things down so people could really accelerate into getting into that priority, whatever that thing was. And then the other thing that we were able to do was show their antithesis, because they showed up everywhere. Like, for example, the jump in versus the tune in.
Why are leaders doing this, do you think?
You mean, why do they do these kind of ultra distracting behaviors? Yeah. They listen, man, they just want to get things done. Number one, they're driven leaders. Now, if you take drive and put that into the environments that we all work in. Okay, so we live in hyper-connected environments, so it's very easy for you and I to connect in so many different ways between, text and Slack, and our project management software has a channel, and, and we've got email, of course. So we're hyper-connected. And if you're hyper-connected, it's so easy to connect with each other that it's, it's hard to be disciplined not to. And also we feel the expectation and the pressure to be a good citizen and to be, sending and receiving all the time. Okay. Also, we're expected to be available because the channels are always available. And if the channel is always available, that saying, the message is the medium. The medium is the message. I got that reversed. That comes from this a fellow in the 70s who said, where we're going is we have these high speed networks. Pretty soon, it won't be the messages that they carry that matter. It will be the speed that they can be carried. That will be the message. It will be how fast can we send things back and forth, not the content itself. And so because we work in environments that we're expected to be on and we're hyper connected, so we're connected to more people and we're expected to be on and more available, or we can be. And then on top of it, we're expected to go fast. So when you're in this environment, that speed is an asset, and it is an asset. All of a sudden, the combination of these things with a driven leader, it's like standing in a parched field. You light a match, that's a lot of energy there. It's going to go up in smokes. And so, to throw us all a bone as leaders, if you're a driven leader working in a hyper-connected, always-on, very fast environment, it's pretty easy not to overcommit and to push that, those distractions, or to make decisions quickly, unilaterally, or to ask people to do things at speed, not very carefully. It's just kind of all at our fingertips, and you're already in a driven person, so the likelihood that you're not going to do it is pretty low.
And it really speaks to the importance of the quality of quarterly priorities when you're setting the major objectives for a quarter, for example, or even a month. You'd better be pretty confident about that. And one of the things that I'm often asked is it okay to change our quarterly priorities or our annual priorities? And my response is always, well, you can, but you better have a really high bar to do that. You want to have a very strong filter and a very strong case, because the world's got to evolve and adapt. But if you're doing good quality work on the input, you're going to end up with really good quality priorities that are the right ones that you're confident in. I can't have it go unsaid for our audience, because they'd be very familiar with the work about the impulsive risk taker from my book, Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better. And there would be themes through there where we're talking about impatience as a trait versus patience, and discipline versus undisciplined. So the undisciplined, impatient leader is what we call the impulsive risk taker, and we work very hard to train around that and to get people to be confident in that. So, given all,
I might say, I think that's brilliant, and the way that you've put that together, because if you are an impulsive risk taker living in the environment that we live in, and then if you compound that with the necessity that people need clarity in order to focus, you're going to have to address that, and you already are, obviously, and that's why you've been successful with your clients, to be sure, is because you've identified this reality. And I really appreciate what you're saying here on this idea. And if you're going to change priorities, you better have a really good reason. And I'll just mention this; you might find it interesting. At least I did. The number one thing that came back in the surveys and the interviews that people said that prevented them from really leaning into their work, their top task, was, I'm not clear. I don't really know where to place my bet. They weren't clear on which of the many priority targets they should aim at. They had 3 arrows. There were 15 targets. And they weren't sure how success would be measured. Or they weren't sure what actions they should invest in, because those are the most appropriate things to hit the target. A combination of one or all three. But But it was the number one thing that people said, that they carried around all this stress because they just weren't sure how to place their bets. But when people are sure on where to place their bets, and if we get real serious about knowing that when you start moving those things around, it takes a lot of work to get to clarity again and to cascade that through an aligned environment, man, that you take that serious, you're going to have some success. If you don't, people are going to struggle to lean in.
It's remarkable how often people aren't clear and how often leaders don't recognize that as being one of the most important jobs is to make sure that people are clear and cohesive and aligned. My question in reaction to that is, how would the top multipliers in the multipliers study, and I'm thinking Lou Gertner is the name that comes to mind as one of them, but how would the top multipliers, do you think, react to make their team members clear?
We didn't study it. In the work that came out, it was interesting. In the work that comes out around Challenger, one of the things that we learned was they were really good at setting big challenges that people would have to lean into, and that would get people's attention. Because when you ask somebody when you set a high bar, you get people's attention because they know they're going to need resources to jump over that to get there. And they also recognize the importance multipliers do of orchestrating small wins, because you need to get momentum. So there's a combination of high bar generating, orchestrating small wins. That really leads to, when you've got people that are smart and capable, they're going to lean into that. They're going to step up. They're going to really, do some good work in that environment. But what we didn't look at, and that was one of the fun opportunities about this in Pause, was we didn't look at how those leaders approached prioritization or the changing of priorities. And that opened up a whole line of opportunity, in this study.
Last week, I was talking with a client, a YPO member, and he said that he decided to delete the email app from his phone, so he couldn't receive an email on his phone. And that really got me thinking about your work and the speed of response. So when a leader replies to every message, Slack, email, whatever it is, within 2 minutes, what are you actually teaching the team about how work gets done?
Yeah, I love that you framed under 2 minutes or within 2 minutes, because, one of two things is going to happen. One is you're communicating that you value speed of response.
Yeah.
And that you're looking for people to respond quickly. Well, there's an implication in that maybe deep thinking or space and time isn't valued. And so now all of a sudden you can have a whole organization believing that the way to do good work is to respond fast. And that it might even be inappropriate for you to ask for space and time to think about a problem. We looked at digital communication in this study, and it was one of the first things that we did. We wanted to crack open what were the ways that leaders digitally distract their team members. And we teased out of that 8 archetypes, and it's in one of the chapters of the book. We call them the digital distractors, but they're things like the novelist. This is the leader that drops small novellas in your inbox. And, you've got to deconstruct those things and then figure out, do you have to return a novella to make sure that they know that you understand the gravity of the situation? Or there's the arsonist, the leader that sends things that have real consequences that should be confirmed, but they don't confirm that they send it to you. They just assume that you're watching your inbox. And then you think, oh my gosh, I can't believe they didn't confirm that I received this. If I would have missed this, we would have lost that account or whatever the consequence was. And so now you get a 24/7 dispatch center. People are waiting all the time to get that big thing to drop. Or maybe there's this is me, the leaky faucet. It's that leader who's streaming their consciousness to you in these little drip, drip, drips all the time, email here, Slack there. And, they intend well. They want to, collaborate with you. I do anyways. I want to share with you what I'm thinking. But now you're distracted by all these little messages. And if you're my boss, or if I'm your boss, it's hard to tune that out. And so, one thing that leaders can do is, if they can become aware, if you can help leaders become aware of how their digital communication is affecting people's ability to focus, if you can name it, then leaders can become aware of their digital wake. everything that happens after they send that email or that Slack or that Teams message. And that's important because with that awareness, they can start to build new habits to then create a different message, which, well, I value thinking. I want you to feel like you can go away for 2 or 3 hours in the morning and work on that project. And with AI, it matters even more because what we've all learned about AI is that the benefit is in the margins for now, for most of us, and that you better bring your brain to the table. You better really be thinking to make sure that the quality of in the quantity that can be produced so quickly is good work. And so, now that we have these thinking tools, we actually need more time to think if we're going to do good work, because, it's like handing somebody a shotgun. Well, that can be quite dangerous if you don't know how to wield it, right? It's a quite powerful thing. And so if leaders can become aware of how their digital messaging habits are affecting teams' ability to focus, all of a sudden you can use that to create a brand new culture around focus and make it possible for people to know that you want them to disconnect and to think regularly, while you also want them to be sensible and responsible in responding, but usually not every 2 minutes.
Very much we create the problem that annoys us, right? Which I suppose, like the accidental diminisher, it's similar. Like, to recognize it is the first step. I want to go back and just scratch on something that you said earlier about 3 priorities. The leadership team agrees on 3 priorities is a principle in your book. What should happen to the work that's already on people's plates when that happens, when we've agreed on those priorities?
Well, what I like about what you just said is sometimes what's not said, and that is that there's already work on people's plates. And what happens so often is that you have yesterday's priorities that become business now as usual. And that took a lot, to operationalize yesterday's priorities and make those normal. We've got most of our capacity is going into maintaining those. So when we set a new set of priorities, and what doesn't happen often is we don't shrink, reduce, or eliminate yesterday's priorities to make sure that we've made space to do the new things that we're talking about. And so in what you just said, which is clever, is that you first have to recognize that there is always something on people's plates. And if you have anything new, if you don't address the reality, the capacity, the bandwidth that is already taken, you're just playing games. And so if you do that as a leader, now everybody knows, oh, okay, so Brad sees the 3 priorities, but he also wants to know everything else that we're currently working on. And he's serious about having a discussion on how we're going to, eliminate, shrink, pause, if you will, these items so we can make the appropriate space to have true majors. And if you think about this in terms of academics, we all know this. You have a major, you can't have 6 majors. You have majors and you can have a few minors. You might be able to double major, but if you double major, there's no minors. And so if you want people to have a major, you can't have 50 minors. And so in some way, what you have to do is you have to declare your minors. You got to get clear on the majors, and then you've got to declare your minors to make sure 2 things. 1, that you've got capacity for those minors, and 2, that the minors aren't going to rob the majors. And there's a couple ways that you can do that. One of my favorites was we learned from a whole bunch of leaders this art of facing the pain of saying no to things. So they would do this exposure therapy concept. So they would get their priorities all up, say, oh, here's the 3 things or the 2 things that we want to go big on. Let's list all of the things that we also would really love to do, but they're not on that board. So we're going to call these important, but not on target. You've got important and on target and important and off target, but we care about these things. We love these things. Whatever it is, we wouldn't say for a second that these aren't important. Okay, just by doing that, now all of a sudden we're getting a little realistic. So now what you can say is, okay, to kill these things that are important to us, let's talk about how much it's going to hurt. What are we sacrificing? We get rid of that thing, like really. And as people start to face that pain together, well, what naturally happens? You start coming up with ways to deal with that pain together. You start coming up with ways to address the realities of turning those things off. Well, you are simultaneously doing something else. You are creating space for the thing that you're going to place your bet on. And people that don't do that, they have a straddled strategy. They don't develop the resilience in their team to really say no to things. And so people get great at adding things, and then they're unable to truly get rid of things because they don't face the pain of it, because it is painful for a driven, ambitious leader to turn off things that they know are important.
How can a senior leader push back? How can they resist when there is an avalanche of new ideas or new projects, priorities coming from above?
Yeah. And each of
I'll probably add on that, without being seen as resistant.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's so important, isn't it? Because gosh, we've got to be realistic about how do we deal with the things that come from above? In every chapter, one of the things that we researched, we wanted to know, but how do you reverse this concept? Okay, so there's a chapter called Pick the Priority Target, and it just reviews gut check. What do we all know? What has to be in a clear priority? If you don't have these things in a clear priority, you're just messing around. So there's an idea. Okay, but if your boss isn't very good at picking the priority target, how do you help them pick priority targets? And so in each chapter, what we did was we went and researched what's the best way to do that in the opposite direction. You have a leader, who's all these things are coming at them from above. And so now that's cascading down to you. And so what do? You can't just say yes to everything realistically and expect that you're going to do something good and that they'll be satisfied with the result either. And so how do you then help your leader pick priority targets? And so, so in this one, we outline a conversation where you don't come in as the prima donna, but you say, okay, look, you've got all these things that you've outlined, and I know these things are what we said we we're going to do, and these are the new things that are coming from your boss. And I just want to know, how would you prioritize these things? Like, okay, I've got X amount of time, and I want to get all of this done. I want to do all of it, but I want to know, how would you coach me to pick where should I put my energy first, and then if something were to fall by the wayside, what would you say? And so now all of a sudden you're involving their brain in the process, not by saying, hey, look, you're not realistic and I'm not doing all this. That's probably not a good idea. But instead you're inviting them in the conversation to just expose, by communicating, you want to do all of it. Of course you do. You're a good sport, but you're not too sure how to prioritize it. And then by asking them to do that, now all of a sudden they start to see the problem that you have. And of course, there's no guarantee. You'll still have some people that are just ridiculous, but most will go, oh yeah. Okay, here, let's work together to rearrange some of these things.
Yeah. That's the, what we would say in a similar tone to people is, there is no such thing as a to-do list because there's no prioritization, because you don't know what to work on first. Everything must be prioritized and work on the most important thing first. One of the things that I've certainly observed is that sometimes ideas can be bounced around or presented by people in a team, by the leader of a team, and it can be perceived as being an instruction. It can be perceived as being, this is what we must do. How do you, as a leader or a CEO, share an idea and try to get feedback on ideas, and then perhaps even then generate time for yourself to consider it without it being seen as an instruction?
I'm going to steal one that I learned from Liz. I don't know that we wrote this anywhere, but I asked this question of Liz years ago. And it was because I was working on a project for some senior leaders at some fairly large organizations, and they were important accounts for us. And I was trying to balance between, when do I take these ideas and run with them because I think that that's what they were really asking for it, or if these are just, nice ideas. And I said, how did you deal with that when you were at Oracle? And you had hundreds and hundreds of people that you were leading, or you were coaching leaders that had thousands of people. And she was like, one of the things you can do is you can announce when you are getting ready to share a soft opinion. Like, okay, I'm getting ready to go, and whatever you want to call it. I'm getting ready to go into idea mode. I'm not asking anybody to go on these, but I want to riff on these for a second. Or I'm getting ready to give you a soft opinion. This is not a hard opinion. Hard opinion means, I want you to do this, or this is very important to me, so please take note. Versus a soft opinion is, hey, I've been thinking about this. Maybe we could consider this, or maybe we consider that. And so I think that if you take the underlying principle of those, is that it is important for us as leaders to label the severity or our intention behind an idea. Yeah. And if we can categorize that for people then know how to deal with it. But if you don't, so often in the best of faith, with the best intention, they're just going to take that seriously and try to execute on it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. It's putting the context into the conversation to say judge it this way or interact in this way. How do you stop pausing from becoming a way to avoid a hard decision?
Well, I'll say that from a pause perspective, we had to have a name for a book. But really what these are is the behaviors that we're reporting on are they're intentional investments on your team's ability to have an impact. And so you're just trying to figure out, where do you calibrate speed, tap the brakes just a little bit so you can have that performance pit stop, so you can get new rubber on the car and get it back out on the track. Because what you really want is the fastest lap time. What do I mean by that? You want more time on the top priorities. You want better thinking on the top priorities. You want people to be able to clear out whatever emotional frustrations are preventing them from getting into those things. There's a whole part of the book which is all about clearing out a mental and emotional frustration that is causing you to time travel, where you're thinking, you're ruminating all the time, or you're wishing that you were out of the scenario. And if you can figure out and help people talk about the things that are causing them to ruminate, causing that anxiety, maybe it's because they failed and they're worried about how they're going to be perceived, in their recovery of that failure. If you can help people, get rid of these things that are either distracting them from the outside or distracting them from the inside, then now all of a sudden you can create this environment where people really can get deep and they can do better work. And so those are intentional investments in impact. And so I think that the key here is that we need leaders that are decisive, that engage us in ways where we make better decisions. And I think that if the pause is designed to get people back on the track, to go faster, to do better, then you've got a proper pause on your hand. If it's not designed to do those things, maybe we're just taking a break, not tapping the brakes, if you know what I mean, like the verb versus the noun.
What do you hope that people take away from this book at a personal level?
Man, I don't know. I don't know that I've been asked that question exactly that way. So I want to admit that I'm going to just fumble through a response. I was so inspired by these leaders that created these environments where personal productivity could live, thrive even. I've always wanted that. I was that geek when you were, when I was a kid, I was always walking around with the latest personal productivity book, I love that stuff. I had like journals coming out the wazoo. I loved to, make my to-do list when I didn't even know how to prioritize. They weren't proper plans yet, as you mentioned earlier. I loved the 7 habits. I loved first things first. I mean, and we could just go through the list, right? Of what was, that's what was, in the water when I was a kid, first getting into my profession. And, I think it's romantic, isn't it, to just be productive and to, if you kick butt and really grow in your career. And I wanted that for myself. And then as you go through your career and you get into business, you recognize how hard it is to do that in a tribe, to really be at your best, to fire on all cylinders. And I was so inspired by these leaders who were able to do this in a way that was so human, recognizing that in all things performance, you have these stops, there's crop rotation in the performance of land, there's sabbatical. The sabbatical leaves come from this idea of resting one every 7 years, a space, or there's the sabbatical in universities where, people need time to space. There's the Sabbath, which, is a religious concept that's about, resting so you can get back at it and really perform and get the insights that you need. And we could go through all of these. There's intermittent fasting because we need autophagy to be able to kill cancer cells and do other things. And so I was so inspired by this kind of ancient principle, this festina lenta, to make pause in your haste. This is not a new idea, this idea of to make pause in your haste. That these leaders used this mindset in a modern way to give people space to do the very best work of their careers. And I just wanted to share it. I just thought this is, the fact that there was this common thread through all of these behaviors that amplified focus. I just really wanted to share it, and I wanted to find out how these leaders actually did it so we could report on it, so teams could scale it in their own organizations and create an environment where you can get the exhilaration from work. You know, that study that Gallup did where they found that they said after decades and decades of a bazillion data points, whatever, how many it was, they said what we learned is that people want an awesome job, and they want to use their God-given talents to contribute. And to do that, most of the time, we've also learned you need a really good manager.
Yeah.
And without
awesome.
it, it's gonna be hard to have a good job. And so I thought, oh, this is a good set of management practices that aren't native to me that I really would like to share with people that are out there in the trade, creating space for others.
Beautiful, beautiful. Shawn, what is a book that you would recommend for our audience?
Okay, I'm going to pick, there's so many, but I have to pick one. So I'm going to pick one. And there's a book that really influenced me that I would have normally read, but I read it. It's called Nonviolent Communication, and it's by Marshall Rosenberg. And how I bumped into it was I was reading the story of Satya Nadella taking over the reins from Steve Ballmer at Microsoft. And I learned that one of the first things that he did was he had his senior team read this book called Nonviolent Communication. And he said that the reason why he wanted them to do it is because he wanted to change the way that they talked with each other at Microsoft. He wanted for them to stop running around judging each other and taking people out and analyzing people to show them why they were wrong. And instead, he wanted for people to learn how to communicate what was alive inside of them. And I thought, well, I don't even know what that means. So I went and got the book. And it's essentially about this way of how can you explain the things that you're feeling and needing and wanting from somebody else, and how do you receive that information when they communicate that, rather than telling somebody what they are, like, hey, you're just irresponsible, or you're awesome. But instead, like, to really explain the thing is that somebody else is doing that is fulfilling or not fulfilling. And this is one of the many books that has changed my life, but I would say that Nonviolent Communication completely transformed my ability to be honest about what was going on inside of me and why I would want somebody to do something different in ways that they could hear. And I feel quite blessed by such an example to bring that one out for me.
It's an awesome recommendation. Because it makes me think about Microsoft under Steve Ballmer and the cultural challenges that existed within the company at that point. And I don't feel that it's like that now. So that obviously is one of the many things that had an impact. I love it. Thank you. How can people learn more about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, so you can go to pausebook.co. That's just one word, pausebook.co, and that will tell you all about Pause. And then there's some tools and some useful things out there that you can do with your team. We've got this How Distracting Am I quiz, and you can have your whole team take it to figure out what are the ways that we might be digitally distracting each other, and download some resources. But and then I'm also at the Wiseman Group.
Very good. Thank you. What haven't we covered off that you hope to cover off today?
Man, that's a great question. That's a thoughtful question. I guess maybe a question for you. It's if you can think back to any one leader in your career that created space for you to really focus, what did they do?
What did they do? They went on holiday. They went on holiday, and I was able to get things done. That's the honest answer. Which may speak to your thesis of the
book. Yeah, better luck for all of our listeners today.
All right. Well, Shawn, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today and the good work that you've done on this book. I feel quite confident it's going to go on to do some great things, because it really does speak to something that I think most of us resonate with and feel. So thank you again for your time today.
Brad, it's an honor. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.